Hi, good day and welcome to another edition of AEA Insight. My name is Daniel Ojo. On this show, as you may know, we try and break down the very complex power and energy sector issues to the very barest minimum with our experts. Today, my guest is someone who is very regular on the show, Engineer Jabesh Amissah-Arthur, a man with a wealth of experience when it comes to the energy and power sector, formerly of VRA and Bui Power, and these days does a lot of consulting across the African continent. Today, we're going to discuss a topic which is a bit technical, but I expect that he's able to explain it to the very barest minimum. System reserve margin, what does it mean? If a country wants to industrialize, how much margin do they need in terms of reserve in their power sector? We'll delve deep into these conversations. My name is Daniel Ojo. I hope it'll be worth your while. Engineer, thank you very much. You look very colorful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We have not met on this show in a very long time. Today, let's talk about system reserve margin. And this topic is timely because of our appetite to want to industrialize, to move our economy to an industrialized one, which means that we need a lot of capacity in our generation and our power sector. But when we talk about system reserve margin, what does it mean to you, the experts?
System reserve margin is an operational requirement if you want to have a stable power system and a reliable power system.
Okay.
The simple explanation is to use like the case that it was when Ghana had only Akosombo as the source of supply.
Right.
And Akosombo had a number of units. And at any time, if a fault came up, one of those units could shut down. Now, what would happen is, when one unit shut down, you had to be able to sustain the system with the rest of the generation that was available. And therefore, you always have to have this margin. Let's say that you have a demand for 100 megawatts or 100 units, and you have 5 units delivering the 100 megawatts.
Mm-hmm.
If one of those 5 units goes off, that means you have lost 20.
Yeah.
If you are not able to replace that 20 very quickly or almost instantly, the whole system will crash down. The whole country will shut down.
Really?
That is how the power system is. And so when you are running like that, you need 1 unit in reserve. And the history of that is that Akosombo actually has 6 units. 6 units. But at a point, we could meet the demand of Ghana with 5 units. So that's 100 I'm talking about. But whilst those 5 were running, if any one of them developed a fault and automatically shut down, then you'll be short. So you had to have a reserve that was 20%, 1 extra unit that was 20%. And so for a long time, the system reserve requirement for the Ghana system was 20%. And that is where it came from.
Okay.
From the Akosombo using 6 units to meet the entire load of Ghana, but making provisions such that any one of them that went off, the rest could hold the system. Now, since then, a lot has changed.
Right.
A lot of other units have come on. But my concern when it gets to system reserve margin is that at that time, the total load demand in Ghana was probably about 900 megawatts. And we had to keep 20% reserve so that we could always be reliable. You wouldn't even know that 1 unit has got a problem.
Yeah.
The others will pick it up, an extra one will pick it up. That is how you run the system. My concern with the thing is that the young people who have come up now, they have not gone back to look at the philosophy for system reserve and have just adopted the 20% reserve margin as the standard requirement. And one young person was telling me that in the universities now, they tell them that 20% is the margin. What they don't realize is that we have gone from a system that was 900 or 1,000 megawatts to one that currently the peak load is about 4,000 megawatts.
Wow.
And so if you decide to maintain 20% reserve, 20% of reserve is 800 megawatts. So you are maintaining 800 megawatts as a reserve margin, which is expensive and is unnecessary. So the principle for deriving reserve margin requires that you always keep some generation in reserve that can replace the biggest unit that you can lose. And for all the developments that we have had, still the biggest unit we have in Ghana is still the Akosombo unit.
Which is how many?
160, 170 megawatts.
Okay.
And even if you go to the thermals, they are 110 megawatts, 100, and so if you add their half of the combined cycle, it's 160 megawatts, 170 megawatts. So still that is what is required in reserve. But unfortunately, people are stuck with 20%. And the work has to be done to reevaluate what that standard should be for an effective operation of our system.
So you say that 20% is too much? I mean, is
Yes.
that it's too much?
It's too much.
And it comes at a cost?
It comes at a cost. Can you imagine? At 20%, what it means is that now you virtually keep the whole of Akosombo in reserve. Akosombo is 1,000 megawatts. So virtually, if you are demanding 20% of the 4,000 megawatts as reserve, that's almost equivalent to Akosombo in reserve without using it.
Okay.
That, I think, is unduly expensive. It is beyond what the system requires for stability and for reliability.
So we have excess systems margin, in your opinion. Isn't it the bigger the better? Won't you say that?
It's, in a certain way, you can say that. But then what you are doing in power system planning, we call something single contingency.
Okay.
So you make a contingency that if you have 5 units running, you make a contingency, a single contingency, that 1 unit can go off and you shall still be able to survive. Now, you can do double contingency. It's expensive. You can do 3, you can do 4 if you choose to do that. But standard system planning rules, it's called single contingency. You make provision for a single contingency, not assuming that the 2 contingencies or biggest contingencies will occur at the same time. You can do that. In engineering, we'll say that you are improving or increasing your safety margin.
Right.
But that safety margin comes with a cost. You must be willing to pay for that.
Explain to me how this comes at a cost. I mean, this is a system which is sitting down, not necessarily working, only maybe works when you need to rely on it. So how does that come with a cost?
It comes with a cost because if, let's say, you were running all the other units, what are some of the biggest IPPs that you have in Ghana? Power, 450 megawatts, Sen Power, 340 megawatts. The 2 of them together, 800 megawatts.
Right.
So if you stay with providing 800 megawatts as the reserve margin, in essence, you are paying for car power as well as Sen Power to be there for the whole year and hope that you don't need them. Okay. That is what you are paying for the reliability that you are offering. You see, I paint it like that for people to appreciate that having a higher reserve margin or these multiples of contingency provisions is expensive. But if you end up with, okay, because you have all of them, car power is operating at 90%, Sen Power is operating at 75%, somebody's at 20%, you don't see it.
Right.
But you are operating each of them below their optimum.
Right.
But as a whole, what you have done is you are producing 400, you are procuring 4,800 instead of the 4,000 and probably 4,200, which you needed.
So what we have, as in the 4,000 you mentioned, is it what we need in terms of when there is peak demand for our power?
Yes, that's what we need to meet the peak.
Okay.
4,000 megawatts, that's what we need to beat.
Okay. So we want to industrialize. So if we have to tap into these things, if there are new companies coming up that are going to have to be hooked onto the national grid, doesn't that come with excess demand, or these are projections that have already been
No,
done?
no, no. So you build for that.
Okay.
You build for that, but you. So let's say that typically the load demand in Ghana grows by 8 to 10% every year.
Okay.
So this year we are at 4,000. 2026 will probably be about 4,400 thereabouts. So you make your investment plan for new generation to match that, so that we should have about 400 megawatts coming on by the end of this year, such that next year is secure. Then another one for the next year and so on. That's what you should do. But when we talk about the reserve margin, it is what is in operation. And so that is what we are talking about.
Okay.
The growth that we expect to see, all we have to do is we have to have plant addition programs that meet that going into the future.
Okay.
But we don't need to have that as operating reserve or the
Okay.
reserve margin
Okay.
for today.
Let's look at the fact that a new government is in place. It wants to operate a 24-hour economy and all of that. Have we calculated properly the power demands that will come with this? Or because I'm sure by the time we were doing this calculation that you talked about, we had not factored in the 24-hour economy, which means that if companies are going to be running in the evening all throughout, the 8% projection may not necessarily be as feasible as you painted it.
Well, whenever you embark on an economic initiative,
Yeah.
it will probably have power supply implications or increased demands for power supply. But the good thing is that these are stable patterns, and they don't just pop up like that. Even if you were to do 24-hour operations,
Yeah.
it's more about leveling the demand so that there aren't so many peaks. You are shifting the demand from one area to another time of day and so on. There will be quite a bit of that. So it doesn't translate to an immediate 5% jump
Okay.
in tariffs.
Okay.
And for that kind of thing, I think our system is quite able to cope with it. And you see the pattern that
Okay.
it's growing not at 8%, but at 9%. And adjustments can be made for the plant addition program to meet that.
My name is Daniel Ojo, and I'm here with Engineer Jabesh Amissah-Arthur. It's a regular guest on this podcast and this show, where we try to break down the energy and power sector conversations and topics for your understanding. Today, we are talking about system reserves margin and whether or not Ghana has it. We've been trying to do some prelims about how to calculate it, how much you need in terms of reserve margin. I'm going to be asking him whether or not Ghana has it, and if Ghana has it, why our power sector sometimes seems to fluctuate with the slightest natural disaster or otherwise. Engineer, so if we do we first of all have a margin, a system reserve margin as a country? We do?
I think that, yes, we do. Technically, we do.
When you say technically?
You have the capacity. In recent times, some of the problem has been fuel supply.
Oh.
And that you can't meet by having a greater reserve margin. No. So it's not all the challenges of the sector that you can meet by having more capacity available. So quite often people are talking about that. But if you have a fuel supply constraint, as last time we did, that WABCO, the West African Gas Pipeline, they are doing maintenance, so they have shut it down. You can't mitigate that by having more plants. It doesn't help you.
Okay.
So yes, the system reserve margin is to be able to address certain shortfalls in generation, but not all kinds of shortfalls, especially when it's coming from fuel or when it's coming for distribution lines going down and things like that. So it is targeted at addressing and mitigating the impact of certain uncertainties in power generation,
Right.
equipment-wise,
Okay.
but not when there's a fuel shortage or something like that.
Should we now have some contingency for that as well? Because what is the essence if you have the infrastructure and you don't have the fuel or whatever you need to power it to make it an effective systems margin?
Well, all those systems, you see, the systems for delivering power have to be created in their own groups of stability. For instance, we have generation, we have transmission, and we have distribution. Now, generation have to have their own way of maintaining the supply. If we require 1,000, they have to have their own redundancy or reserve margin there, such that they can always deliver the 1,000. The transmission system, transmitting the power all over them, they also have to follow the same principle of single contingency, such that any single problem they have doesn't prevent them from delivering. The distribution system also have to have theirs, so that the chain flows. Now, if any one of them is unable to meet the obligation, then the chain collapses.
Wow.
So the generation have their reserve margin to maintain their reliability. The transmission also have their single contingency constraint that they always monitor and design their network for, so that if the line between Koforidua and Tafo goes off, it doesn't have to mean anybody loses supply. They can reroute and get it done. The same for everybody. Now, what we have seen is that in the old days, when we were hydro dependent, all you had to do was make sure that you had water in the dam and you were okay. Now, water in the dam is the same as fuel supply for the thermal plants. What we haven't done very well so far is to have that single contingency or reliability problem solved in the terms of fuel supply. So that now when West African gas pipeline goes down, there's chaos, because there's no alternative to doing that. And that is the part that we have to work on.
Right.
We have to build redundancy into the fuel delivering arrangements that feed the thermal plants, so that they can also be stable. And then with the transmission also meeting their requirements and distribution, then the chain can be solid.
How should we go about it? If I came to consult AEA, Arthur Africa, to give me an advice as a country on how to mitigate this,
yes,
what will be your recommendations? There will be free consultancy.
Yeah, if you promise to pay us in the future. No, but
I'll be a retainer.
But because one thing is clear, that we have gas, a lot of gas in the West. In the Abuaze Takrade Atuabu area, we have a lot of gas, and there's a potential for more gas production.
Yeah.
The challenge for us now is that we have a lot of thermal plants in Tema that don't have gas, and sometimes are compelled to operate on liquid fuel. So what we need to do is to find a reliable route to bring gas from the West to Tema. That is the first step in ensuring that there's some redundancy and there's some security of fuel supply to the thermal plants in Tema.
Okay. You think this will take significant financial outlay to deliver?
It will take some financial outlay. I've seen the initial estimates for it. It will take some outlay, but it's doable. And the interesting thing that it will be more cost effective than what we are doing now, because the cost of liquid fuels is so much higher compared with gas, that if you built the pipeline to deliver enough gas to Tema, and therefore you weren't using liquid fuels for some of the plants, that cost saving should pay for the cost of the line.
Do you know if these conversations have started?
The conversations.
I know there is a plan to build a second gas station or
gas processing
plant.
Yes.
Is that part of the bigger idea?
Conversations has been going on.
Okay.
I know some of the studies have been done already, and hopefully it will get done, because attention is coming onto that, and it will get done.
Okay. So, I mean, before we wrap up, are you insisting that we need to reduce our current 20% margin that we have as reserve?
I think that it has to be reevaluated.
Okay.
The people in charge of planning now have to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate what is the level of reserve margin that we require, and not just adopt the 20% that we had set 40 years ago. It was 40 years ago when we set that.
Okay.
It's not a healthy thing. They have to revisit it, reevaluate it, see what the current system needs, and set a new standard for it. And I believe it will come down substantially from that 20%, because I can't see the justification for maintaining 800 megawatts as a reserve margin. I can't see it.
If we balance our energy or power mix in terms of solar, wind, and all of that, does that also help bring down this margin that you talk about?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
There's a misconception about solar. You know, that may be true for the developed economies. In the Europe and America, that may be true, that if you develop solar, it reduces your reserve power requirement. But for the developing or the underdeveloped world, that is not true at all.
Okay.
And I think that most of our experts haven't taken time to study it and understand that. And they adopt what the Americans and the Europeans are recommending without thinking through it. But the reason is this. Solar, as you all know, produces in the daytime.
Right.
In the developed economies, their peak load occurs during the day when the factories are in operation. So any generation that is in the daytime reduces the requirement on the total peak. So solar in the daytime reduces their peak requirement, which is in the day. In the developed and underdeveloped world, our peak time is in the evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Solar won't help you, 7 to 9 p.m. Yeah. So solar has no impact on our additions requirement, and it has no impact on meeting peak demand. Okay. And you still have to build conventional plants to meet that 7 to 9 p.m. peak. So the economics of solar for a developing economy like ours is very different from the economics of solar in the advanced and industrialized world. And our planners have to sit down and look at this, because if you do 100 megawatts solar in Ghana and the peak goes up by 100 megawatts, you are still going to have to build 100 megawatts conventional plants. So what you are doing is you are building 100 megawatts of conventional plants as you would if there was no solar, and still build 100. So you are doubling the investment in generation.
Okay.
And that has to be taken into consideration. I get worried about many of us buying hook, line, and sinker, those recommendations from the industrial world, without realizing that they are not applicable to us. Mm-hmm. So solar has a role to play, but solar has no impact in our economy on the peak demand. Okay. And therefore we still have to build conventional plants. Okay. And so you can't offset your demand in the evening with solar generation. That is something that our people have to take into consideration. We can talk about solar is a particularly different topic and a touchy topic. We can discuss that a little more. Having a lot of solar presents another challenge for the operation of the system. And sometimes the proponents of solar and the proponents coming from the developed world, they don't have an adequate appreciation of this. Currently, without solar, as you get to the evening, the peak of the system, without, let's take it that you are running your conventional plants, from 6 p.m., the load quickly goes up by 500 megawatts. And so the operator of the system has to put on new units that will add 500 megawatts between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. That means that every 15 minutes, they have to put out 100 megawatts. Every 15 minutes between 5 and 6 p.m., 100 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 100 megawatts, plus one more, before they can meet the evening peak. Now, when you bring solar into our system, you worsen that problem. Supposing you had 400 megawatts of solar installed in the Ghana system. At 5 p.m., all that 400 megawatts, they shut down. Mm-hmm. So instead of filling the normal increase of 500 megawatts, the system operator now has to first replace the 400 megawatts solar that has been lost before he adds 500 megawatts for the normal increase in demand, because people are putting on that peak. That becomes 900 megawatts. And so between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., the network operator is going to have to put on how many megawatts? 150 megawatts every 15 minutes. Wow. And that's very, very difficult task to do. Okay. Because the units have to come up, they have to ramp up at a certain rate, you have to put on another one, another one, another one. And it gets to a point that demand to ramp up the generation by 900 megawatts between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. is too challenging for the network to encumber. And so that becomes one of the things that our planners have to put a constraint and threshold on it. Okay. You can't, for instance, have 2,000 megawatts of solar, because then in the evening, you are now going to have to put on that 2,000 plus the extra 500 in increased demand. And that is impossible for us to do in any system. So although solar is very good and is doing fantastically well for other economies, our policymakers have to be careful and have to set limits on the solar that we can put into the network because of these challenges.
Thank you very much, Engineer. It's always eye-opening when I listen to you talk about the power and the energy sector.
Yes, the topics are very interesting.
They are. Thank you very much for the pleasure of your company. This has been another edition of AEA Insights with me, Daniel Ojo, and Engineer Jabesh Amissah-Arthur, who is the managing partner of Arthur Energy Africa. Arthur Energy Africa. He's been sharing some thoughts on system reserves margin in Ghana, across Africa. He's also had some recommendations for policymakers in that space. This has been another edition. Like I said, we'll be back another time with another edition. Until then, it's bye for now.